Talk to me nice, talk to me honest.
G'day Art Snackers, my name is James of James Luke Burke Creative and welcome to another month of ArtSnacks Box Freestyle, where we take the supplies from the July 2022 ArtSnacks Plus box, experiment with them to within an inch of their lives and then hopefully create a masterpiece for the hashtag ArtSnacks Challenge. We have been getting to know so much about each other and I've got another fun fact for you today. This one is 7 years in the making. For those of you who don't know, I used to be a professional dancer before I became a mixed media artist, and I'm happy to say that I'm bringing those dance shoes out of retirement this Christmas season. I've officially been offered a job to return as a professional dancer. I'll still obviously be doing my mixed media arts and crafts, you know how much I love that, but I'll also be a dancer again, and I'm really happy to share that news with you. So that is my fun fact. I don't know if I can top that one, but I'll keep trying next month anyway. Let's get in the box and see what we have to play with today. Alrighty, here is the ArtSnacks Plus box for July 2022. Here's everything inside. Let's unwrap that green burrito and take a closer look. In the Plus box, we have a Fluid 100 hot press watercolor paper. There are 12 sheets in this little pouch, and the size 8 by 10 inches. In the Plus box, we also have a set of 8 Talons Art Creation gouache, and this month we'll also be playing with the Daniel Smith Extra Fine Watercolor Stick. I have the color Phthalo Blue, green shade, as well as a Princeton Lauren Series 4350 Golden Synthetic Brush size round 2, and a Unipin Fine Line brush pen in black, as well as 2 Faber-Castell Polychromos colored pencils, and the ones I have are Dark Cadmium Orange, number 115, and Earth Green, number 172. As per usual, we have the sticker and the snack. Let's set everything up and get to experimenting. I've used some of my ArtSnacks washi tape to secure that loose sheet of paper to the desk just so I can keep it really flat whilst I'm testing everything. And I've also used that grey paper palette that we got in ArtSnacks Box a few months ago, I think. I'm actually not quite sure, but I got it in an ArtSnacks Box recently, and I've been loving using that as a little paint palette. It is really clever, and I think I mentioned this in that video, but just again, when you're mixing colors a lot, like with gouache, you've got this beautiful set of colors, but you might want to mix a lot of secondary colors. It's really helpful to have it on a mid-tone gray, because you get to see the values of how light your colors are that you're mixing, and also how dark your colors are, because that mid-tone gray is right in the middle. I think it's like a 50% gray. So it's probably one of the most useful tools if you're someone that's really getting into kind of color matching and mixing. I think it's a really good thing to think about. When you do it on white palettes are obviously going to be super bright. If you do it on a really dark palette, I don't know if people use black palettes, but if you use a metal palette, that tends to go a bit darker gray, or it's reflective. Sometimes those can kind of throw off the colors you're seeing, but this is definitely very helpful. And you know, when I'm using something like gouache, I kind of need all the help I can get. I am definitely still in the learning stages of regular gouache. I like to cheat and use acrylic gouache because it's a lot easier to layer, and I usually just buy the color I want and I don't mix anything. So I really struggle with mixing the right consistency and then also mixing the right colors. I do have that one trick just there, that if anything is too transparent when I layer it over a dark color, usually a yellow typically, I'll just mix a whole bunch of white into it and then mix a whole bunch of yellow back into it, and that way you can, it first becomes pastel, but then you can add a lot more yellow and make it more vibrant. You'll just get that white will kind of block out a lot of that transparency through to the black. So that's how you can get a bit more of an opaque effect with some of the watercolors that don't, some of the gouache that don't layer too well on dark colors. I'm putting some clean water around the page as well, just to test the lift and like the staining of some of the colors and the gouache. I'm also going to do it with this extra fine watercolor stick from Daniel Smith. This was a really, really hard crayon to use as a crayon. I don't think it is a crayon, it's a watercolor stick. I'm not too familiar. I do use kind of dried watercolors. I don't really use them straight from the tube, so I am familiar with kind of reconstituting watercolor and using it that way. You tend to get a bit of a lighter effect unless you're really going in full strength pigment, and in that case, if you want like the most you can get out of it, I would just recommend dipping the stick into some water and just drawing with it that way. I did that there. You can see it's a really, really vibrant puddle of blue. I'm also using a paintbrush just to reactivate it. See how staining the original crayon lines were, and then how much I could lift back up, how much I could scrub away. Those are all kind of interesting things to know, just so that you can make your decisions about how you're going to use those effects in your final piece. Ultimately, when we're doing this, especially if I'm not doing anything too crazy, I mean, I'm going to get a little experimental in a second, I just want to know what all the effects are, all the colors that I can use and all the effects I can make with them, because then I can just chop and choose what might make for a good effect for my final piece. I don't use everything, so that's why it's nice to have this little experimentation time up front. You can see I first dipped that extra fine brush pen into the blue watercolor, and that was really easy to get that nice kind of blue into gray into black watercolor effect with the brush pen. But then I dipped it into the gouache, and I think the gouache was just a little too thick to kind of self-clean off the brush. But with a lot of these brush pens, or kind of anything really, markers, you can, if they're water-based, add some of that water-based medium to the tip and they will self-clean, and you'll get this really nice gradient effect. We do that a lot in these experiments. I've kind of optically blended some of those pencils. They weren't colors that I would typically put together, so I was just kind of curious to see what they would look like when they blended in the middle. And I can't even really put my finger on the color. I mean, I think it's brown, but it is kind of odd, and they were both colors that I wouldn't really choose. I'm not a huge orange fan, and as far as greens go, I use a lot of vibrant colors, so this kind of earthy green just kind of threw me for a loop for a second. So I did start a little bit of a painting, and we'll see where we end up. So this was my first attempt, and I was giving myself a lot of grace with this one. I was trying to do a really solid, flat, opaque looking gouache painting, and then using the extra supplies to add the details. I thought that would be a surefire way to feel like I could be successful, but also, you know, it would kind of just depend on what I chose to paint in the end. And I didn't really like it at first. I didn't mix the right consistency. It wasn't super flat. Again, I still struggle with trying to get the right consistency, and therefore it just doesn't look right. So I thought, you know what, lean into the fact that I don't really mix it that well, see what happens that way. And usually when I'm feeling a little bit out of my depth, which gouache will do that to me, I will try to do something that I feel really familiar with. And if I've done one thing 1,000 times, it's draw an Alice from Wonderland. So that's what I decided to do, and it suddenly gave me the right idea, the right direction. And so I think I really wasn't, I guess, in the wrong place when I did my first attempt, and that was kind of the thing that shocked me, because I was like, oh, I really don't like this. It did not work out the way I wanted to at all. But I essentially did the exact same thing, and I just changed the inspiration. I actually gave myself one. The first one was just a bit off the cuff, and actually giving myself a subject matter to work with that I liked really changed my perspective on how well I thought I did. I think I've mentioned that before as well, but when you are trying these challenges, you don't have to try to challenge yourself to do everything and anything you've never done before, with subject matter you've never done before, with skills you've never learned before. It is okay to lean into what you know you like, especially if you're already feeling challenged in other ways, like myself with the gouache. So here is a bunch of the experimentation. I loved the Alice, and I thought immediately I want to go for that kind of kids storybook, like children's storybook illustration style, and I just wanted to lean in and try something that I don't think I've showed you before, or I think I've showed you a version of, but I'm going to show you this today, and I'm going to talk about why I think it's really important. I'm going to use the card from the box just to rule out some lines. I want to work in the middle of this page, and I'm going to create 3 paintings that are exactly the same on this same page. I'm going to do that Alice exactly the same way I did it on that test. I'm going to do it 3 times, literally one after the other. I'm starting in the middle just so we can get a good reference from middle, left, and right. I probably should have started on the left. That would have made more sense, I guess. But I don't know. I started in the middle. I was just feeling like, that makes sense to me. If you're going to start something, I always start in the middle, I think. Anyway, all of that aside, I decided to lean into what I was already struggling with, right? You know, not mixing the gouache with the consistency that I felt like I was struggling to get, and kind of leaning into that patchy, transparent look. There were some parts of the gouache that were a little bit more opaque, there were some parts that you could totally see through, and I kind of like that streaky look. It's something that I have always felt like made for the wrong impression. I felt like it showed that you couldn't handle your materials properly, or that you just weren't doing a good job. I thought it showed a complete lack of skill. But once I had seen it in my little test, I thought, oh, this does look very much like a lot of what I see in kind of modern children's book illustrations. Like, this is its own kind of style, this kind of, you know, it's a careful approach, it's a simple approach, but you are working with those transparent kind of layers and that messy but kind of controlled messy effect. So I leaned into that and I did my base with all of those really simple colors, and then I used my pencils to add some of the details. And the thing I like about ArtSnacks challenges and all these kind of challenges where you're kind of given the supplies and you can't choose them, or they're very limited, is you end up using things you would never use. I would never have chosen an orange for the mouth and the cheeks, and I would never choose a light green for the eyes and the shadows. But in this, it all totally worked out. I kind of loved the effect of it, and I'm probably going to try and start using more orange for lips and cheeks from now on. I'm usually a red or a pink, it can't be any other, but I don't know why I've been sleeping on the orange. So you always kind of find these fun mixes that you would never have chosen, so I love that. I'm using the crayon to add, or I should say the watercolor stick, to add some of that crayon texture. And because you've got this flat, kind of streaky, kind of half transparent base, any of those textures are just going to pop on top, like that really kind of textured look of the crayon, that really textured look of the pencil, and this super solid, really rich black line, it just really stands out on it. So I felt like this was a really great way to not only lean into some of the struggles that I was having, but also create a really fun effect that was in essence actually quite simple, and it kind of just plays up to the strengths of the different characteristics of your art supplies, which is all about what the experimentation is for. It's just to find out what textures and what things they can do so that you can really capitalize on that. You can really use that to good effect in your artwork. I've sped the next two up because I have just done them the same way. The thing that I wanted to show you about this specific ArtSnacks challenge is that you can do something exactly the same way with exactly the same supplies and still not be able to create exactly the same thing. Now, why is that important for me? Well, when I was learning, it was kind of freeing to believe that I didn't actually have to create the exact same thing that my teacher was showing me, because it was hard. It was hard to mimic something so closely that it looked exactly the same, and I felt like I was a bad artist if I couldn't do that. So that is a little bit freeing to know. It's also nice to know that no matter how hard you try to copy something exactly, it is almost impossible, especially with something like gouache and you know, this really stylized version of an image. It makes you just feel like there's something inherently unique about your hands, and every time you sit down to do something, there's a little bit of something specially you about it that can't be replicated. And I think that's just a really nice thought for people to hold on to, especially when you're learning and you're discovering styles and what things you like to do. Sometimes we can feel like we're not doing enough unique art, but I think there's always something unique about it every time you sit down to do it. And then the last thing is, it is just really nice to know the subtle variations that might make all the difference. Sometimes you don't get it on your first go, sometimes you don't get it on your second go. You could have all the skills in the world, all the time and patience and supplies in the world, but sometimes it just takes 4 attempts at it to get it right. And I love the one on the right, which was the 4th one I did that day. So there's that. That's why I think it's important to know, and that's my ArtSnacks challenge. There we go, there's our final piece for the ArtSnacks challenge. I hope you enjoyed that. If you would like to join ArtSnacks, you can do so using the code JAMES10 at checkout for 10% off. And don't forget to share your work with us in the ArtSnacks community on the Mix and in social media with the hashtag ArtSnacks Challenge. Thanks for joining me, have a wonderful month, and I'll see you next time. Bye.